The introduction to the biblical context of human origins serves as a foundation for understanding how the Bible addresses the origins of humanity, which is crucial to exploring the specific question of the origin of Black people according to biblical text. Within this context, the Bible provides a narrative of human creation primarily through the Genesis account, where God creates Adam and Eve, establishing the progenitors of the human race. This story underscores the idea that all humans have a common ancestry, which is significant for understanding racial and ethnic lines within biblical perspectives. The significance of understanding human origins from a biblical context lies in its influence on theological and cultural discussions about race and identity. Throughout history, interpretations of the Bible have impacted beliefs about the origins of different peoples and have been used at times to justify racial ideologies or promote unity. For instance, some interpretations suggest that the descendants of Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, are the progenitors of different races. Although this is a controversial and debated point, one example of real-world application is how the biblical narrative has been used in teaching and discussions in religious settings, influencing the views of millions on human diversity and unity under one God. Another application is seen in historical contexts, where biblical texts have been cited in both support and opposition of slavery and segregation, demonstrating their powerful role in shaping societal attitudes towards race. There are many opinions supporting the biblical view of a shared human ancestry as an argument for equality and against racism. Religious leaders and scholars often emphasize that the Bible advocates for the inherent worth of all human beings, created in the image of God. However, this topic is not without controversy. The interpretation of biblical passages related to race has been contentious, with some historical misuse of these texts to promote racial superiority. Additionally, alternative viewpoints often arise from scientific perspectives on human origins, such as evolutionary biology, which may conflict with a literal interpretation of the Genesis account. These differences highlight the complex interplay between faith and science. This introduction connects to the broader topic by setting the stage for discussions on the existence and identity of Black people within the biblical narrative. It influences how subsequent analyses are framed and encourages a dialogue that blends theological, historical, and cultural insights, aiming to foster a deeper and more nuanced understanding of the origin of all people in religious discourse. The concept of biblical narratives and the lineage of Ham stems from the interpretation of various passages in the Bible, primarily from the book of Genesis, which discusses the descendants of Noah's sons after the Great Flood. According to these narratives, Noah's three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, are the progenitors of different races and peoples across the earth. Ham, in particular, is traditionally considered the ancestor of several African nations, based on interpretations of the Table of Nations found in Genesis 10. The significance of this point lies in its influence on historical and cultural perceptions of race and ethnicity within a biblical context, often being used to trace the origins of Black people. This lineage is significant as it has been referenced over centuries in theological discourse, cultural identities, and even in justifications of societal constructs such as racial hierarchies. One example illustrating this point is the so-called curse of Ham narratives, where Ham's son Canaan is cursed by Noah to be a servant to his brothers. This story has been utilized, albeit controversially and inaccurately, throughout history as a justification for the subjugation and enslavement of African people by associating them with Ham's lineage. Another example is the identification of various African tribes and nations with the descendants of Ham's sons, such as Cush, Mizraim, and Put, within biblical genealogies, thus tying cultural and national identities to these biblical roots. Scholars such as David M. Goldenberg have argued against the historical misinterpretations of these narratives, particularly the connection of the curse to Africa and its peoples. They stress that the biblical text does not explicitly associate the curse with skin color or race. Additionally, alternative viewpoints highlight the danger of using religious texts to justify racial discrimination, emphasizing that such interpretations are often based on cultural biases rather than scripture. Despite the controversies, these narratives connect to broader discussions on the origins of different peoples according to biblical texts, adding depth to the topic by exploring how ancient scripts have shaped modern-day perceptions of race. These interpretations influence religious, cultural, and historical discussions, reminding us of the power of narrative in shaping societal norms and beliefs. By understanding these narratives and their implications, we can better navigate the complexities and sensitivities involved in discussing race and heritage within the biblical framework. The role of geography and migration in biblical accounts. This concept refers to how geographical locations and the movements of people play a crucial role in the narratives found in the Bible. These factors are significant in understanding how different peoples, including Black people, are depicted and possibly originated according to biblical narratives. Geography influences biblical stories by providing context to the events and shaping the interactions among different groups. Migration, on the other hand, helps explain the dissemination of cultural, religious, and ethnic identities across regions. The significance of geography and migration in the context of the origin of Black people in the Bible lies in the way these factors contribute to the diversity and complexity of biblical genealogies and histories. For instance, the Table of Nations in Genesis 10 gives an account of the descendants of Noah's sons, including Cush, who is traditionally associated with territories in Africa. This connection offers insights into how ancient people understood racial and ethnic origins. One specific example is the story of the Queen of Sheba, who is believed to have come from the region of Ethiopia or Yemen. Her interactions with King Solomon highlight the cultural exchanges facilitated through migration, influencing both the biblical narrative and historical perceptions of African civilizations. Another example is the Ethiopian eunuch in the Book of Acts, where his conversion to Christianity signifies the spread of biblical teachings beyond the traditional boundaries of the Jewish world, showing a literal and metaphorical migration of ideas across lands. Opinions that support the importance of geography and migration in these contexts often emphasize the interconnectedness of ancient civilizations and the expansive reach of biblical influence. Scholars argue that these factors offer valuable insights into the ethnographic and cultural dimensions of biblical stories, shedding light on the broader historical context in which they were written. However, potential challenges and controversies arise in interpreting these biblical accounts. Some argue that traditional biblical interpretations have been Eurocentric, leading to debates over the representation and significance of African peoples in the Bible. Additionally, alternative viewpoints suggest that the Bible's references to geography and migration might be symbolic rather than literal, sparking discussions on the historical accuracy of these narratives. Ultimately, geography and migration interconnect with other aspects of the Bible by influencing theological interpretations of race and history. They provide a lens through which to explore the origins and interactions of peoples within biblical contexts, contributing to a more nuanced understanding of the legacy and influence of these ancient texts on contemporary discussions of race and identity. Interpreting biblical texts through the lenses of symbolism and allegory involves understanding scriptures beyond their literal meanings. In the Bible, many stories, characters, and events carry deeper symbolic significance that conveys moral, spiritual, or philosophical truths. These layers of meaning often offer a richer understanding of the text and can shed light on complex issues such as the origin of different peoples, including Black people. The significance of exploring symbolism and allegory in this context lies in the potential to uncover interpretations of biblical narratives that speak to the shared humanity and spiritual ancestry of all people. By examining these texts allegorically, interpreters can suggest that biblical genealogies and stories are not just historical accounts, but also metaphors for spiritual truths. This can offer insights into how the Bible frames the origin of Black people in a way that transcends simplistic or literal readings. A notable example is the story of Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, in the book of Genesis. Some interpretations suggest that the descendants of these sons settled in different parts of the world, symbolizing the diversification of humanity. Allegorically, this can be seen as a narrative that underscores the unity and diversity of the human race rather than division based on skin color. Another example is the Song of Solomon, which includes references to dark skin that some interpret symbolically to convey beauty and divine love, challenging prejudices and affirming dignity beyond racial constructs. Supporting this allegorical approach, many theologians argue that emphasizing symbolic meanings fosters inclusivity in a more profound spiritual connection among believers. However, there are challenges and controversies. Literal interpretations of the Bible have historically fueled racial prejudices, and certain readings have been used to justify discriminatory ideologies. Critics argue that allegorical interpretations risk straying too far from the text's original intent. Nevertheless, these perspectives offer a platform for dialogue and reconciliation in faith communities. This approach influences broader discussions about race and identity within biblical contexts by encouraging unity and understanding. By viewing the Bible through a symbolic lens, we can foster interpretations that promote equality, acknowledge the shared spiritual heritage of all people, and address historical misinterpretations that have contributed to racial tensions. Ultimately, delving into symbolism and allegory connects Scripture with the broader narrative of human history and cultural identity, enriching the exploration of the origin of Black people as depicted in biblical texts.